All right. Thank you, Charlotte.
Sorry about that, everyone. Howard, please continue.
Sure. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start off by telling you more about us a little bit more about who we are. And then I'll get into, as Ian mentioned, I'm going to talk about why automation is important, and I'm going to take the perspective of some of the key people involved in the process from an AP perspective and a management perspective. And we'll talk about why automation is important, what the benefits are, and then I'm going to talk about why AP Express is the right automation solution to help resolve the issues around AP processing. I'll cover some of the key features and then get into the demonstration of the product. And as Charlotte mentioned at the end, we will give you some time and we'll address any questions you may have. So a little bit more about us. Our corporate office is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As you heard Ian mention, he is the head of our EMEA office based in London. Our background is Oracle. The expertise that we have in-house allowed us to take a existing customer need. We had some customers that were we knew from an Oracle perspective, but they were looking for an invoice processing automation solution, and they were having trouble finding one that was affordable, but also gave them the functionality that they needed. So we decided to build AP Express, and that is our mission. That is why Nivo1 is in existence. We focus on AP automation, the improvement of document processing. Our goal is to make AP Express full of features and functionality, but our goal is also to make it affordable for any size organization, regardless of the number of invoices you process. So the way we've structured this makes it affordable for any size company. So let's talk about why automation is important, why automation is the right thing to do. And hopefully some of this today will give you the groundwork for a good business case to help you get started in the direction of automation if you're not already headed down that road. I'm going to start off from the AP clerk or AP processor perspective. We know that the AP clerk or processor, they deal with a lot of paper in a manual environment. You know, when automation is absent, paper is moving around, lost, or you're getting invoices lost in the process. A lot of manual entry. It takes a long time to get an invoice through a manual process. AP deals with not knowing where to code things, where to charge things, and they're constantly trying to get invoices back from approvers back into AP. So it's just a daily grind, so to speak, for them. So that's one of the key roles that is most positively impacted by an automation solution. And then from the approver's perspective in this process, everything's manual. It's difficult for them to get invoices approved because they may be out of the office and the invoices are sitting on their desk. They lose invoices also because it ends up on their desk, and who knows where it goes from there. Nobody is following up with them, reminding them that they have invoices on their desk to approve. And nobody's coming around taking those invoices and moving them on to the next manager when those approvers are not responding. So it's just difficult for the approver, and we know that it's difficult enough to get an invoice approved. Even in an automated environment, you still have to rely on the approver to respond, but in a manual environment, it's just extremely difficult. And then from the management perspective, in a manual environment where you're not really capturing everything, It's really hard for management to understand what's going on from an accounts payable or invoice processing perspective. They may not have any metrics, KPIs type of data that they can see. They may not know that there's a problem until they get an angry supplier on the phone asking for their payment and complaining that they never get paid on time. And then it really gets bad when the supplier is telling you that I'm not going to deliver your product because you're not paying me. So, everyone forgets that AP is extremely important, because if you're not getting your bills paid, that affects more than just the accounts payable and accounting department. It affects operations in many cases, when suppliers are just unhappy and they're not going to give you the performance that you need. And all of this from a management perspective affects cash flow, and it also just prevents management from getting ahead of these types of issues. So thinking about this from those perspectives, and we know those perspectives are going to flow uphill. So if there's difficulty, it's going to rise to the top at some point. So how do you solve this, and why do we think AP Express is the right solution to solve that problem? First and foremost, we have pre-built AP Express to natively integrate with the Oracle, primary Oracle products, e-Business Suite, JD Edwards, PeopleSoft. It is built out of the box to integrate with these applications. E-Business Suite is our flagship product, but we, as I'm saying, JD Edwards integration is built. The PeopleSoft integration is built. This is not a case where your IT department is going to have to spend any time developing anything. We've pre-built everything, and it's ready to use out of the box. By doing that, it allows us to implement AP Express rapidly. In many cases, we can implement and have you from test to production in 30 business days. And that's very feasible. Now, the caveat to that is that's using the product as delivered in production, the current production version. In some cases, we do modify the product for customers. And if we do that, it may extend that implementation timeline, but it usually doesn't extend it very long. But in most cases, 30 business days is plenty of time. We also build the product to scale. As I mentioned early in my comments, we built AP Express because we were being told by people looking for an automation solution, and we would hear this at conferences. They would come by our booth and they would tell us, yeah, I talked to so-and-so, and they said, since I don't process 10,000 invoices a month or more, I'm really not worth their time. And so, hearing these things, we intentionally built AP Express so that you can use it no matter how many invoices. We've got customers doing a few hundred invoices a month in the product. We've got customers doing tens of thousands of invoices a month. So the product can handle the volume. We also allow you to have unlimited users in the product. We do not charge any licensing fees. So you don't have to worry about, if I add more users, is it going to cost me? What's the surprise in the bill this month when I've added these additional users? We believe a product like AP Express, we believe a product where you're trying to provide access to information, it just seems like a penalty to charge a company, an organization, to pay for the users who need to see the data. So we don't do that. Another benefit of AP Express is you're going to get previews of any new releases that are coming out. A lot of cloud applications today, I kind of relate this to my mobile phone, my iPhone, and you get those messages, you start getting those annoying messages that you need to upgrade to the latest iOS, and eventually it just does it for you if you ignore it. But it's going to annoy you, until you do that. So, but from an AP Express perspective, we don't just put something into production and then tell you, by the way, we did an update over the weekend or overnight or something like that, and surprise, you've got some new changes in the product today. We give you the ability to see what's coming in the next release before it goes into production. And a really big key point, and I know it is for the IT departments out there, very minimal commitment from IT to not only implement AP Express, but since it's a cloud-based product, all the maintenance is on us. So your IT department has very minimal commitment in time and support going forward. So let's talk about some of the key features of the product. It is cloud-based, I mentioned that. This point about ERP integration equals intuitive UI. What this means is when we build AP Express for an ERP solution, eBusiness Suite, JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, we intentionally build it to look like the ERP system. So, and I'll show you an example of that of one of the pages in the demo when I get to it. But we build the screen where it makes sense. We build the screen to reflect the ERP system as much as possible. This reduces user, knowledge transfer from a learning a new screen layout and everything else. We keep the field names the same. We just want the users to be able to use AP Express and feel comfortable as they would in their ERP system. We give you multiple ways to load invoices. So you can capture invoices into AP Express by scanning them directly in. You can scan an invoice to your desktop and create a file and load that through the application. But you can also forward emails with invoices attached to AP Express. So if you have a supplier that emails you an invoice that's attached to an email, you simply forward the email. You don't have to download that document. You don't have to print that document out and scan it in. It's very, very easy by just forwarding that email. And there's no restrictions to the number of invoices that can be attached to that email. So it can be one or more. The application allows for, again, just as any application would need to, if I issue purchase orders, if I require receipts to be entered before allowing an invoice to be processed, AP Express can handle that. We allow and build for PO and receipt matching. So that functionality is built into the application. We use intelligent data capture to enter the information. What you're going to see in the demo today, when I open an invoice on the screen, everything that's captured was captured when the invoice was loaded. So I won't have to do any data entry. And so as invoices are loaded into AP Express, it is reading those invoices and finding the key information based on keywords, text to location, things like that. And so the user is not required to do anything with that. We have an interactive approval workflow, so the approvers get email notifications. They get an approval queue in the application, so they can log in and do those inside the application. And as the last bullet here mentions, we have a mobile app where the approver can not only see the invoice image on their mobile device, but they can also interact and do coding from their mobile device as well. So it's the way I like to put it now is the approvers can run, but they can't hide anymore. There's no excuses for not getting something approved. We built in analytics into the application, and I'll show you more of that in the demo coming up. And I'll show you how the analytics work, and talk about how the users can define the view of these analytics or KPIs, the way they want to see them. All right, so I'm going to switch over to the application now. Let me get that up on my screen. And we'll see if it logged me out. Yes, it did. All right, so this is our login screen. You know, one of the things for a user that's nice to have is we have some, you know, the forgot password functionality. So if a user happens to forget, it's just real simple. They click that link and it will take them through a self-service reset process. So when I log into AP Express, and I've got this zoomed in just so I want to make sure everybody could see everything. So I've got this zoomed in a little bit on my screen to make sure that, of course, you know, every user can adjust it to what's better for them. But when I log into AP Express, the landing page is going to be our dashboard home tab. And the view of this page is going to depend on the user's role and the access they've been granted from a security perspective. And you can see, you know, right off the bat in this drop down below my welcome message, we segregate data in AP Express by operating unit, just like Oracle EBS does. And just let me just say this, I am going to work primarily in the EBS version today, given that our attendance, our audience is predominantly EBS. But again, I will touch on some of the differences and show you some of the screens in JD Edwards and PeopleSoft as well. But this dashboard, this is our EBS version. And so the dashboard, you know, is going to be the same across the versions, okay? So the purpose of this home tab is to give you a summary immediately when the user logs in. It gives them a summary of all of the invoice activity in the application right now. And you can see that there's a couple of different views. There's a managed work view on the left. And this is a summary for someone who would be overseeing the invoice workload. So an AP supervisor, manager, someone that's managing the invoice activity across all AP processors across the entire accounts payable process. And so that's why you see all the various statuses in the managed work view. The My Work view that I have is really more for the AP processor. And so this is the view that someone that's daily processing invoices, that's their role, is to get the invoices processed through the system. So this view that you see is all these different tiles represent obviously the status of an invoice and the quantity of invoices that are in that status. So as you know, as I want to view details from this page, I don't have to leave the screen to get more information about some of this data. So for example, if I want to look and see what's in the approval in progress status, I simply click on the tile and it actually gives me a list of those 3 items below the chart. And this gives me some high-level information. It gives me my current approver, so I can see who that is. It gives me some supplier information, invoice information, like the number, the date. And so if I want to get another level of detail, again, I don't have to leave the page. I can simply click on this, and actually will take me down into this specific invoice where I can see invoice header information, invoice line information, approver list, who is this gone to and who is it pending approval, and then any notes that may have been added would be shown here as well. So I can drill down and get a lot of information on this page without ever having to leave the screen. So and you can do that again for any of these tiles. You can drill in and get that type of information. And one last point, there is an export function here where if I get this list here on the screen and I want to export this for any reason, I can export it to a CSV formatted file that I can you know, put in Excel and reformat it, analyze it any way I want, send it to anyone I need to, things like that. Okay, and again, the operating unit separation, if it says all operating units, this is giving me a view of the count across all the operating units that I have access to. So if I'm, again, in this case, just for demo purposes, I kept the list short. So I have access to 2 operating units, which means that this all operating units means it's a sum of the activity across the 2. If I separate them out, then I get, the specific counts for each operating unit. So, all right. And that data, like I said, is segregated by operating unit throughout the entire application. So let's go over to the Manage Work tab. And I'm going to come back to the dashboard before we finish up and talk about the analytics, which are also accessed from the dashboard. So the Manage Work page is actually the detail behind that Manage Work dashboard. As you see on the left, there's a sidebar filter. This allows me to expand a group and look at something specific. So I can narrow down, things that I want to work on just by selecting these different filters. And as you see across the top of my results region, I've got a breadcrumb trail of the filters that I've selected. So I always know, what data I'm viewing and what the filter is based on. It's very simple to clear these filters one at a time. There's a simple X there to clear the filter, or to clear all filters at the same time, just hit the clear all, and you're back to viewing the full list of data. We do have functionality in the application of catching duplicates. So, here down below here in the list, I've got a possible duplicate. So we give you actually a couple of setup options in AP Express. You can keep the duplicate checking somewhat high level, or you can make it more restrictive. At the base level, it's looking across supplier, site, invoice number, but you can actually change that setup to where it's looking at, it will also add the invoice date and the invoice amount. So you can make it a very restrictive duplicate check if you want to. We give you the option to do that because we know, we know Oracle is working on the duplicate checking functionality based on some enhancement requests that we've seen. So we've added that to get ahead of that and have it there whenever Oracle gets there. This Manage Work page is also where invoice assignment takes place. So if I filter on unassigned invoices in the list, and assignment is referring to, are they assigned to an AP processor yet? Someone who's going to process the invoice. So assignment can be done. I won't go into all the different places in the application that this is done. I will just talk about it. But there are ways to set up automatic assignment rules. So I can assign invoices automatically when they're loaded into AP Express. And I can do that based on specific supplier. If an AP processor always processes the same supplier, I can have those assigned to them automatically. If my AP department is set up where processors process invoices based on the supplier name, for example, you may have your AP department set up where suppliers A through E get processed by a specific AP processor. So that's a setup option as well. We also give you the ability to assign invoices automatically by operating unit. So if the same person gets all invoices for a specific operating unit, you can make that setup as well. So we give you different options for assigning invoices automatically as soon as they come into the application. If for some reason an invoice is loaded and it doesn't meet any of those rules, it will come into this queue as unassigned. An assignment can be done in a couple of different ways. You can do an individual assignment simply by selecting the user and clicking the assign icon next to the name. The other thing that I can do is I can use the mass assign over here below the filter on the left, and I can select an individual user and click the assign button, and it would assign all of the unassigned invoices on the screen to that user at the same time. So it just depends on how you prefer to assign those invoices. So once invoices are assigned to an AP processor, this is where they're going to spend their time working on invoices. They have a queue called My Work, and you saw the summary of that on the dashboard. So this is where an AP processor works on the invoices. And again, they have very similar filters on the left side of the page that they can use to search for invoices they want to work on. Everything starts out in the to-do status. So as soon as someone gets an invoice assigned to them, it's just going to show them it's on their to-do list, basically. Once they process an invoice, it can end up in different statuses. So, for example, down here towards the bottom of my list, I have an invoice that's been saved. That means I started processing it, but somewhere during the process, I saved it. I don't want to start over, but I also don't want to lose the work I've done. So I saved it. I can have an invoice that's out for approval. So it's in the approval workflow, things like that. And occasionally, the user may see some additional icons in the status column and in the field. And so these new icons relate to the data capture process. So I mentioned that we have intelligent data capture. So when an invoice gets loaded, it reads the invoice and captures all the information, invoice number, date, amount, etc. Creates the lines for me. All of that process takes place at the time of the invoice loading. Now, we all know that OCR is not ever going to be 100% perfect. There's going to be invoices that get loaded, and for whatever reason, the supplier used some different wording that the OCR didn't recognize to label the invoice number or some other field. Or it had trouble reading it because of poor image quality. So on occasion, there's going to be a reason that an invoice didn't read 100% successful. And in that case, the AP processor has the ability to actually notify us that the invoice needs training. And so they can send that to us, and we have a team of people who monitor training requests that will go in. They'll train that invoice to make sure that it knows where to get that data from now on. And then once they've done that, the next time that invoice gets loaded, it's going to find the information correctly. As I hovered over this icon means that it's been trained. So this invoice was sent out for training, was trained, and now the user knows it has been trained, so that when they open this to process it, it's ready to go. It's going to capture everything correctly. So other icons may exist there related to that, and I'll talk more about that here in a moment. You can see over here on the right, you have the ability to put invoices on hold. If you don't want to process an invoice right now, or for some reason it needs, you're waiting on some additional information, or somebody tells you we're not ready to pay that for whatever reason, you can apply a hold to an invoice here as well. So let's start out with a purchase order matched invoice. I'm going to start with the PO matched. And as I mentioned, when these invoices were loaded, the data capture process found all of this information. So for example, it found my PO number from the invoice and populated it. It found my invoice number, my date, my amount. On the left side of this screen is the invoice header. So that's all the header information that's captured. And down in the lower area of the page, that's the line region. So that's where the lines are created. And of course, on the right is the invoice image. Now, what took place here, just so you understand how those lines below were created, is when the OCR found the PO number and populated it into the PO number field. When I opened this screen to process this invoice, it looked up that PO data and brought the PO lines into the line area for me. So what this does for the user is it shows them the available quantity from those purchase order lines. So if the quantities match the invoice quantity. So in other words, if the invoice is is billing the full amount of the PO line, then it immediately matches up to the available quantity, and I've got a completed match, and I don't have to do anything else to this invoice. And at this point, I have done nothing to it. The only reason I'm spending time on this screen is because I'm explaining the process. For an AP processor, if they opened this invoice and saw everything's in balance and everything was captured correctly, they simply submit this and move on to the next one. They're only on it for a few seconds. And you know, AP processors get very fast at doing that as they get used to doing it. But you can see, I can see that I'm in balance because my invoice amount matches my invoice line total, and I have this green check mark visually to tell me that, as well as the green shading of the amount field. If I look down in the line area, I see the PO number, the line number, all that information as to what line this was matched to. And then if I scroll over, I can see that my GL code came from my PO line and was populated on my invoice line. So again, for a PO matched invoice, the AP processor in many cases should not have to do anything. If everything matches up, they simply just move it on and go on to the next one. If for some reason, let's say an invoice came in and it should have a PO number on it, and it wasn't, they can easily, and they know this supplier should always have a PO, they can easily look up POs by clicking on this lookup. And when they get this purchase order selection window, they can use the search field here to the right to actually look for a purchase order that should be matched to this invoice. So even if it doesn't find a PO, they know that it should have a PO. They can actually find a PO by searching for it. Okay. We do also apply some restrictions. So for example, if an invoice, let's say you've got a purchase order set up for receipt match option, which means a receipt has to exist in order to match an invoice to that purchase order and receipt. If the receipt does not exist, then AP Express will not build a line. And as you can see on this screen, the shading of the field, the indicator that I don't have matched invoice lines, and the reason why is because this purchase order has not been received. And if I actually look at the PO information and look at the individual lines, I can see I don't have a receipt quantity. And it tells me that this PO requires receipts. It was set up as a receipt match option. So we do some validation. We check things like this. And this functionality, as most of you will be aware, is same as EBS. EBS will not let you match an invoice. If the PO was set up as a receipt match option, you can't match that invoice in EBS if there's no receipt transaction. So it works the same way here. Okay, let's do a non-purchase order invoice and let you see how the capture works there. So in this occasion, again, when I open the invoice, I see everything was captured from the image, my supplier information. It's not a PO-based invoice, so I don't have a PO number, but it did capture everything else. Now, one of the things about our OCR process is I can actually click in these, some of these fields. If I click in it, it will actually put a box around the data that it captured. Okay, so this one I wanted to use as an example of when an AP processor could use that training process that I talked about. In some cases, the OCR might just miss part of a value for some reason. In this case, it missed the N on the front of my invoice number. So this is where they would use the send for training process. This is where they click the send for training. They'll put in a comment for us. They'll tell us, hey, didn't capture the entire invoice number correctly. So we'll see that when we get the request to train this. The way we've built this is they can send this to us and tell us what needs to be corrected. At the same time, they can continue processing this invoice. So if they need to correct this invoice number, again, they simply can select it, put it into the field, and now they've got the correct invoice number. They can move on and go ahead and process this invoice this time. And then while we're training it, the next time they come to a supplier, this supplier's invoice, it will then be trained to pick up the complete invoice number based on the training. So we don't hold up the processing of invoices while they're going through the training process. So once that's done, everything's good on this invoice. The only thing left to do is code it. So it's non-PO. I don't have anything, the PO to give me the coding information. And we give you, multiple ways to code invoices. You can turn these coding options on and off depending on which ones you use. So over here to the right of my line information, I have a button that says set. So when I click that, I get a couple of options. I can use a distribution set, or I can use a GL code to code this line. If I have project accounting turned on, I'll see a project accounting button in that window. There's multiple ways you can put in a GL code. I can type the value in here, and as I type, it will actually prompt me with available valid options for the next segment coming up, okay? Or I can copy and paste an entire accounting flex field combination into this field. The other option is clicking on the lookup and getting the pop-up window where I see the individual segments of my accounting flex field, and then I can pick the individual values there. I even have the option in AP Express, if my approver is the one that's going to do the coding on this invoice, I don't have to put in a code. I can submit this invoice, pick my approver, first approver that it needs to go to, and anyone in the approval process can enter the coding or edit the coding if I have that turned on to allow them to do that. So for this non-PO invoice, I'm just going to go ahead and click submit. And again, non-PO assumption is it needs approval. So you see a name that populated here when I open this. When I click submit, you can set up default first approvers by supplier. If you don't have a default first approver, it's going to tell the AP processor to select the first approver. And I'm going to change this and pick this Bill McKinney guy. One of the things that we've added recently into AP Express is the ability to view the approver list based on the first approver. So when I click that button, it's going to show me every person that this invoice is going to go to based on the approval hierarchy and the approval limit assigned to each person. So this is going to have to go to 3 people to ultimately get approved based on this invoice amount, okay? I'll show you in a moment a different invoice. We have an option that you can set up where you can actually allow the AP processor to modify that approval list so that they can actually build a custom approval list for a specific invoice if they need to. I'm just going to start the approval on this one. The other option here you see is force approval, and that's a way to bypass the entire approval process. And the reason we provide this is it may be an emergency. It may be an urgent invoice. It doesn't need to wait and go through all of the approval process. So you may want to force approve this to get it into Oracle immediately and not have to wait on it to go through the approval hierarchy. So that's an option. This option can also be turned on or off by user to give someone or take away this ability. So I'm just going to click Start Approval, and we'll get this invoice off into the approval process. And now, as the AP processor, I always have the ability to see, the ones that are approval in progress and who they're waiting on my screen. So now let's do one. I'm going to go ahead and use this saved one that I have, and I'm going to show you the difference between those approval list management real quick. So if I want to modify this list and it's set up to do so, and this is something that can be set up by operating unit, I actually can modify this list by dragging names over to the approval list area on the right. And as I do that, I can continue to just move it. I can move them around, put them in the order I need to. So it allows me to modify that approval list if I have it set up to do that. Okay. From an approval perspective, I mentioned, approvers are going to get emails. They're going to get ability to do it through the mobile app, and then they have an approval queue in the system as well. So approvers have multiple ways they can get to these invoices to approve them. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the archive. This is where all invoices in the system can be searched. This is where invoice history, processing history can be found. I can see things here. I can always see the image of the invoice in this archive. I can see details, so I can always look and see all of the history of the invoice and the processing that it took place. I can search dynamically for invoices using any information. Even an item description can be put here if I'm looking for information at a line level. So it's a dynamic search across all of the invoice data. This information can be exported. So whatever my search results are, I can export them and basically create an Excel file or report out of it. And so again, a place where people can get all the information about invoices, even fully paid invoices. Once they're paid in EBS, or any of the ERP systems, we send back the payment details, so you can easily come and see payment history on the invoice as well. Okay, keeping an eye on the clock here, I'm going to jump back to the analytics on our dashboard. So you can see I've added a tab here on the dashboard for invoices. This is where I can add charts, my different KPIs about invoice data. I can add new tabs from here. I can have as many tabs as I want, on this page, and I can add charts to the tab once I've created the tab. We have a significant number of charts and KPIs already built into the application related to invoice and supplier data, but we will build KPIs for customers specifically if they have some that we don't already have here. I can find charts or KPIs, based on searching for keywords. If I'm looking for something for suppliers, for example, just simply search for it, add the chart to the screen. One of the things I can do is if I decide I want to rearrange these, I can drag the tabs and put them in a different order. I can do the same thing on the tab itself. If I want to rearrange these charts, I can just drag them around and get them in the right order that I want. Some of the things you can do with these charts, you can edit the chart and change the filter. So if I want to see a different view of data, simply change that, and now my chart is updated immediately. And then I can delete it if I need to. If I don't want to see this chart anymore, I can share the chart with another user, email it to someone, or print it. I can even change the view. If I want to see this as a pie chart versus a column chart, I can do that. If I want to see detail behind one of the result panels in the column, I click on it and I get a pop-up with the columns that I can see in this view, and I can even manage that. Okay, I can add a column if it's not displayed. I can move things around and get them in the right order. And then once I have it the way I want it, I can email, print, or export this data into a report if I need to. And again, this is by user. So every user can have as many tabs as they want and the specific charts they want on each tab. So they can do that the way they want to. Okay. Real quick, I want to show you, I think I probably got logged out by now, but let's see if I can get back in. Okay. So I want to show you quickly, this is a JD Edwards view of the processing screen. And I want to point this out because, as I said, we build these specifically for the ERP. So the screen is going to look like the ERP system. The field prompts, everything is going to be familiar to the user based on the ERP system that they're using. We do the same thing in PeopleSoft. So it looks like the PeopleSoft invoice processing screen or voucher processing, whichever you prefer to call it. So, but from a JD Edwards, each ERP system is reflected on the invoice processing page to reflect the way the ERP system looks. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my, finish out my slides here so that we can move on to questions. Let me get back to this. So wrapping up, we've automated with AP Express. So what we've gained from doing that is we now have automated intelligent data capture. So again, it's capturing the data and entering it for us so that the AP processor is not keying. We've got an electronic invoice image now, and it's in the system immediately. So as soon as I get it, if I get it into the system, I can see that at any time, from anywhere. So that gives me a lot better invoice visibility into the system. It also gives me the ability to see that image during the approval process because it can be routed electronically. This lets me, give the approvers the ability to code these things online versus having to send them the invoice and, to send them the paper invoice and them to have to sign it and fill the coding in and things like that. They can do this online in the application, or they can do it through their mobile app. Everyone that has access to AP Express and the right security has visibility to all the invoices in the system. So it's easy to go and look for something while it's, once it's in AP Express. And I talked about just now the ability to, for each user to create the analytics, the view the way they want. And I'm going to remind again, how minimal the effort is from the IT department on setting up AP Express and even going forward with it. So hopefully what you've seen today is a feature-rich application. It is affordable. Again, it's based on your invoice volume. Everything is natively built for Oracle integration. The pricing is very simple. It's all inclusive, so there's no additional charges for support or maintenance or anything else. We offer that rapid implementation of 30 business days. And I think I've hit the minimal IT commitment quite a bit. But we've also got proven data security in a cloud-based application, and we can provide details around that at any time. So let's get in to see if we have any questions here in the last couple minutes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you ever so much, Howard. We have a couple of questions, so I will just get those out for you. So the first is, if an invoice goes through perfectly and is processed, does the invoice still appear in an AP processor My Work queue for review? Or does it simply go through without needing any input?
That's a great question. And I was hoping somebody would ask about that. Yeah, we're actually very close to having what's most commonly described as a touchless process. Very close to having that ready. So the answer to the question is not in the current production version, but most likely coming in the next release. And that next release is probably going to be mid to end of first quarter of 19. So yeah, we're very close to completing that, and I'm excited about that because as I showed you, if everything's captured correctly, we don't want it to have to be touched. So getting those touch points out of the process is the goal.
Perfect. And then the second question is, who configures the system to be able to handle new suppliers, the user or Nivo1?
Okay, I'm going to take that question as mentioning new suppliers. Well, if you have a new supplier that you're just going to start doing business with, as soon as you set that supplier up in the ERP system, they're going to be available to use in AP Express, because we integrate that data real time. So if I go and set up a supplier in EBS or JD Edwards, as soon as that supplier is created, it's going to send that data to AP Express. So it's going to be there as quickly as I set it up, and I can start processing invoices in AP Express. And I hope that was the question, and that I'm answering the intent of the question. So.
Okay, thank you, Howard. Another question is, can you tell us more about data capture? How is it taking place, scanning or email?
Yeah, the data capture takes place as soon as the invoice reaches AP Express. So whether you scan the document, so if you get an invoice in the mail and you scan that document and create a file, and if you email the file or upload the file to AP Express, however you get it into AP Express, the data capture takes place as soon as it's loaded into AP Express. So, any of those channels to get the invoice there starts the process. So as soon as it hits the application, it's going to go through that OCR, or that data capture process. So the data is already ready when you open that invoice on that processing screen.
Perfect. That is everything. Any question that's been put through to the question box via the webinar.
Great.
As I did last time, any delegates on here, I'll be sending an email out which will have a critique link in there, so we can get a survey, but it will also have an address on there. So if you do have any more questions that come to mind, there is a way of being able to put them to Nivo1. I'm sure they'll be able to answer them for you. I think that is everything. And thank you ever so much for those able to join. And thank you ever so much, Howard.
Thank you, Charlotte.
No problem. And if there's any UKAG questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself. Thank you very much. Thank you.